Well, howdy, y'all. Today I'm going to be making a Texas Longhorn. Um, I just got back from a vacation down in Texas visiting my grandparents, and throughout the trip, I couldn't help but notice all of the lovely landscapes and longhorns that were in the area. So today, Mr. Melvin makes a longhorn. For this drawing, I'm going to be doing some painting, so I'm using multimedia paper rather than my normal drawing paper. I've got my Crayola supplies with me. Pencil first, Sharpie for outlines, colored pencils for a little bit of color, and then I'll top it off with watercolors. As always, pencil first when I make a drawing. I think it's a great idea to follow those steps too, especially if this is your first time drawing something like this. So for the longhorn, I'm going to start by sketching a incomplete rectangle. Wherever you decide you want the head of this longhorn, draw a skinny rectangle with the bottom open. And now I use the word sketch because I'm going to be erasing parts of that box later, so it's very important that you do not draw too hard or press too hard with your pencil when you draw that box. Next, I'm going to kind of draw a squiggly line to show where the horns go across the head. So I start on one side, curve down, down, and then up one more time, trying my best to make it symmetrical as possible. But don't worry about absolute symmetry. It just wouldn't exist in the wild, so don't try to make it work in your picture. Find some comfort in knowing that if it's not exactly the same on both sides, that's okay. I kind of do a curvy triangle or almost teardrop shape for the ears, and I keep in mind that same idea of symmetry. They won't be the same on both sides in the wild, so I shouldn't fuss too much to get them exactly the same in my drawing. For the snout or the nose of the longhorn, this actually reminds me a lot of an episode of SpongeBob with the hash-slinging slasher. So that's kind of what I'm going for this guy's nose here. With kind of a peanut shape, I do an almost infinity kind of shape across the bottom of that first rectangle I drew, and then just kind of a U line, a line that curves down and up to show where the mouth would be. Inside of that peanut shape, that sideways 8, whatever you want to call it, just add 2 nostrils, however you'd like. What I'm drawing now is just a couple of lines, 2 coming diagonally towards the center, towards the ears to show where the eyes would be. That's kind of the eyebrows. And then 2 lines going up from the snout or the nose to show kind of the top part of the snout. Inside of the ears, I'm just adding some detail to show where the actual inner ear would be. And then lastly, just 2 curved lines above the eyebrows to kind of add some more detail and texture and form to the face. If you're following along with me, actually, right about here, you have yourself a Chicago Bulls logo. So if that's kind of more your style and interest, that would be a great direction to take this drawing. I just finish out the horns by drawing the bottom line that kind of mirror the top. And you can see I erased the top part of that first rectangle. I told you we'd be doing that, and that's why you have to sketch first. Remember what I've said before, if this is your first video with me, then just know the eraser is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're paying attention, you're trying your best, so be proud when you erase. I know I am. Right now I'm just adding in the body, and you can actually see that I'm going to have to erase here in a second. I started making this longhorn a little too wide for my liking, so trimming him up, drawing the line closer to the body to make him a little bit thinner, and using that eraser to fix my mistake. Mistakes are welcome here at Mr. Melvin Makes, you know that. Please do not become discouraged when you grab that eraser. Please do not become discouraged when you grab the eraser. The legs on the longhorn in this picture are just really simple. 2 kind of lines going diagonally towards each other, getting narrower towards the bottom of the page. And you can see now that I'm going through and outlining or tracing my pencil lines with Sharpie. This is a step I enjoy to do. I recommend it for my students. When you draw something you're proud of, I think it's a great idea to add some emphasis to it with a black line. Some art instructors will tell you that there are no outlines and would actually recommend you don't do that, but for the purpose of this video and for my personal interest, go ahead and do it. Just remember when you trace with Sharpie or outline, always have something under your paper because it can bleed through and ruin the table you're working on. That's why I've got that drawing board underneath. So catching up with myself in the video here, I am adding in some cacti. In Texas, I was amazed actually at how much cacti I saw. You know, I didn't really expect to see that much, but it was really beautiful. It made their landscapes a lot more interesting than I think the ones I've got back home here in Wisconsin. So I'm going and just adding in a little hill closer to to us as the viewer, and adding some cacti on there. In the background behind the Longhorn, I'm just adding a horizon line. If you don't know what that is, it's a line where the sky meets the ground. So just kind of a straight line or hilly line across the paper to show where the sky will start and the ground will stop. On that, I'm adding this kind of tree that I kept seeing in Texas. I believe my grandma mentioned that those were mesquite trees, if she's correct. So adding one of those in the background, and then just, again, outlining my cacti. Going forward, you'll see me using both of my Sharpies. I use the fine point for kind of my bolder details, and then I go back in with my ultra fine to add my tinier details and textures. So you'll be able to see that in just a second here, and follow along with me on my background. Remember, here at Mr. Melvin Makes, you are the artist. You have ultimate control of how you design your artwork. But if you need some ideas or need some guidance, just follow along with me the best you can and enjoy. So for this video, I'm adding a combination of dry media and wet media to finish off my picture. For those of you who don't know what that means or what I'm talking about, let me just explain first what the idea of or the word media means. In art, when we say media, we're talking about anything you're using to make your picture. I really enjoy using dry media just because it works in a time crunch. It doesn't make too much of a mess. I live in an apartment, so I don't really have a huge working area. But for this one, I'm actually combining dry media and wet media. Dry media being my colored pencils, and crayon in a little bit here. My wet media is my watercolors. So if you're following along with me and you've got more time, it might be a great idea to actually start with your wet media, paint everything loosely, wait for it to dry, and then add crayon or colored pencil on top. I'm in a little bit of a time crunch today, so I actually did that backwards, which works too, and you'll see how it works out for me. I'm doing my dry media first, and then I'm going to watercolor paint on top of it. For this tree, I'm just adding in details loosely to get the idea of a tree in the distance. I'm going to add some more trees next to it, showing the idea of space. On my horizon line, I'm going to kind of show the trees getting smaller as they go backward in space, creating this idea that things are smaller in the distance as they would be in real life. So you can see that right there. I'm also just lightly coloring in some green where there would be patches of grass to add a little bit of texture and variety in color. I always like to show shading in my pictures, so whenever I use one color, I try to find a darker value of it so that I can press that into the areas of shadow. You can see that in the cactuses where the bottom left corners, I use a darker tone of green, or I should say darker shade of green to show value. I'm going to use that same technique with the Longhorn, keeping in mind that I will paint on top of this. I'm really just going to add in a darker value for shadows and for texture, and then because it's me and Mr. Melvin loves to make things orange, I'm going to pop some orange in on top just for a pop of color and visual interest. Personal choice, if you want to copy along with that, that's up to you. You could add in your own favorite color in some kind of creative way, remember you're the artist here. But just so you can see, I'm kind of thinking about my light source, maybe the sun being high up in the sky, casting a shadow on the edges of the longhorn's face. So pressing a little bit harder, I'm adding in those tones or shades, and I am kind of sketching or drawing in the direction the fur or hair might be laying on the face. So for example, around the cheeks, I'm doing diagonal lines in the direction of the hair, and that actually creates the idea of texture. In my hash-slinging slasher there, I'm keeping in mind that that is a different color on the face than the fur, so I grabbed a different kind of peach color or lighter tan to add that in. And I thought that was such a nice color, I'd add it in the eyes as well. Going forward, you will see me just adding in more details with colored pencil, and then following up with watercolor. I'll be right back. So I just want to take a moment to talk a little bit about watercolors and how you can use them safely and responsibly at home. It's always a great idea to have something under your paper when you start a watercolor drawing. Because it is wet, it can soak through the paper and cause color and pigment to transfer through, also ruining a table, sort of like Sharpie. And you just want to keep your work area clean. So I've got my drawing board there as a buffer from paper to table. You might want to put newspaper underneath your paper if you are going to watercolor with me. I'm using my set of Crayola watercolors, which is going to work just fine for me. But if you have a nicer set, feel free to use those, and actually I'd encourage it. It's a great practice to use something that comes out of a tube, but if you're using cake watercolors like me, that's great too. In this video, I use lighter tints of colors. You can see, for example, right now I'm using red, but I'm making a pink. If you don't know how to do that, allow me to explain. Making a lighter color just means more water on your brush than paint. So you can see I'm dipping my brush into water and hardly picking up any color when I touch my brush to the watercolor cake. Doing so will create more of a watery color effect rather than like a dark saturated and almost sticky color. So I always think more water than paint is best, because you can always add darker color on top. For example, down there at the bottom, you could see how I was attempting to show shading or shadow with a darker brown using a little bit more color on my brush. It seems though I got a little heavy-handed and I had to be a problem solver just like I anticipated. Using a darker color meant the water got a little bit more crazy, got a little out of control for me on this paper, so I needed to tear just a tiny bit of paper towel to soak up that extra bit of water and fix my mistake. I know for an artist that might seem really discouraging, but it's easy enough to fix. Just soak it up with a paper towel. Because it's water, it'll soak right up into that absorbent material, and then you can brush right over it. It's no problem. So I'm demonstrating here how you would clean up your watercolors, but I kind of forgot I've got one more thing I need to do. I almost left this picture without a sky, but I want to show just one more trick in this lesson before I wrap it up, and that is using crayon as a resist. So you hear the word resist and you know it kind of means, defying or resisting something, and the crayon is going to defy the color pigment from the watercolors. It's going to resist all of the pigment and not allow it to go onto the paper. Crayon is super waxy, so what I'm doing is I'm just hiding in a couple clouds in the sky, pressing hard with my white crayon, and it'll almost pop up like a hidden message. After doing so, I can paint right on top of it, and as long as my paint has plenty of water in it, that design that I drew with crayon will show up. So follow along with me and check out how that turns out for me. I even hid my signature in there just now, a C and an M above the Longhorn's back, so check it out. Enjoy. Well, there you have it. Mr. Melvin makes a Texas Longhorn. Thank you so much if you stuck around and followed this video with me. Share your artwork with me either on Facebook or Instagram. On the side you can see the colors I used today and other materials. Let me know in the comments below what you'd be interested in making. I would love to take your ideas and show you how to make that. I think it'd be a great way to get you involved in the artwork I'm making here on Mr. Melvin Makes. As always, thank you, and I really, truly hope you enjoyed.